Hello and welcome to the Rugby Show here on the 42.ie in sunny Dublin. Gavin Casey here. Oh, our friend Murray Kinsella is down in Sydney and it is bucketing rain, although the forecast is meant to be decent for the weekend ahead of Ireland's decisive test with the Wallabies, looking for a first series win down there in 39 years. Murray, how's the form? How are you?
I'm good. I'm not enjoying the weather, I have to say. It's been a bit of a nasty surprise, but yeah, pretty exciting week nonetheless, and couple of interesting team selections as well to really spice it up. So can't wait for Saturday. It's going to be a brilliant game. Yeah,
obviously if you're watching from home and you have any questions or maybe advice to Joe Schmidt or anything you'd like to ask Murray as well, do get in touch. We'll read out a few comments and have the usual kind of crack with that. But Murray, as you mentioned there, some interesting team selections, so we might kick off with that. 5 personnel changes for Ireland, 4 positional swaps. I suppose on the face of it, when we looked at it this morning, it looked like he'd taken a couple of risks, maybe he made a few bold calls. And he probably still has, but a lot of it now we've found out has been kind of dictated by injury. Maybe run us through some of the changes to begin with and give us your assessment.
Yeah, well, I guess the injuries, first of all, it was the first question in the press conference with Joe, like who's injured, just trying to balance the idea of him taking a few risks with guys actually not being available. So Dan Levy, Ian Henderson, Gary Ringrose and Andrew Conway were all ruled out. 3 of those guys injured in last weekend's test, and Henderson also missed he's carrying that knee injury that made him miss the second test altogether. So a blow to lose those guys, and in particular Gary Ringrose, who I thought added a lot to their attack with his creativity. His passing game was really strong. He set up 3 line breaks for Ireland. His footwork is good again. Missed a couple of tackles, but generally I thought he added a lot. So those are blows, and it did simplify things for Joe Schmidt. The changes are, there's as you say, a couple of positional ones, but guys coming into the team in Jack McGrath. We've Sean Cronin coming in. Jack Conan gets a start at number 8. Really interesting to see how he goes in a kind of strange looking Irish back row. But Conan is a guy who probably hasn't quite grasped his last few chances with Ireland. He came on a couple of times in Six Nations and it didn't go really particularly well for him. He's been good for Leinster, and we know how dynamic a ball carrier is. He's got an offloading game. He brings something a little bit different, and he's the kind of athlete who could really thrive. But I think he's almost at the point now where he needs to have a huge game, because if you look at the guys still to come back in the back row, guys like Sean O'Brien, Ruddock, Josh van der Fleer, guys who are injured at the moment, and look towards the World Cup, it's a very competitive area, and now you're at the stage where nearly every chance is pretty much a last one. So big day for him, and also for Sean Cronin, who, as we know, dropped out of the matchday squad for the second test. Ireland weren't happy with his scrummaging in the first, so a big chance for him to kind of bounce back. Jacob Stockdale obviously comes in on the wing as well, and that means a slight shift with Keith Earls going back over to the right. Bundy Aki in at 12 with Gary Ringrose missing, but there's a pretty familiar centre combination there between himself and Henshaw. So yeah, generally, as you say, you kind of looked at the team and went, wow, that's a little bit of a mix-up from Schmidt, but really a lot was dictated by injuries.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously it's a couple of combinations back together. On the one hand, you've got the Grand Slam winning back 3. On the other hand, you've got a midfield that maybe might have been slightly maligned after the first test for lacking creativity somewhat, probably compared to Ringrose, who came in. How big a blow do you think it is it to lose Ringrose, not only in attack, I suppose, but just how defensively aware he is, positionally and whatnot?
Yeah, like a good example late in the game against the Wallabies, he made a really good read and shot up on Curly Beale in the Wallabies 22 just to shut down a chance on the outside edge. He's really good in that department, and there were a couple of bad errors from Robbie Henshaw, I guess, in that department in the first test, which was uncharacteristic. He hadn't played for a while. There was definite signs of rust there, and I would expect his decision making and his execution of those decisions to be a lot better in this test. You mentioned there the lack of kind of creativity. In fairness to Bundy Aki, he did put CJ Sander away for that line break, that nearly ended up in a try. But there were a couple of other times where he just didn't trust himself to throw that pass. He had the vision to pick out the option, but maybe just didn't release it. There was one on a set piece play where they came back down the 5-metre channel, and Bernard Foley kind of got in the passing lane. Probably could have gone over the top of him, but he just didn't trust himself to pass that time. Also, when he got turned over just before the disallowed Israel Folau try in the first test, he just didn't trust himself to pass that ball into space, or probably didn't even see it that time. So there's definite improvements you can make there, and 1 or 2 passes, are the difference between a pretty blunt performance and one that looks quite creative. So, yes, Ringrose will definitely be missed. I think we know and understand now how important he is for this Ireland team, and he's getting better all the time as that second playmaker. But look, there's real quality in that midfield regardless.
100%. You mentioned one of the sort of more positional swaps, I suppose. Peter O'Mahony going across to 7, and well, as you alluded to, it is sort of an odd-looking back row on Saturday for Ireland. I was just wondering, like, it might maybe for the more casual observer, what are the sort of changes O'Mahony will need to make in his game, or at least the changes he'll experience, like swapping sides in the back row from 6 to 7?
Yeah, well, essentially, like Ireland talk about these roles, so he'll have a completely new menu of roles, particularly off set piece and stuff, off the lineouts. He'll still obviously be a target for them to throw to, but he'll be running different lines away from the set piece. From the scrum, for example, he's obviously on a different side of the scrum now. He's on the open side of the scrum, so he's got to be one of those first guys to the first ruck that Ireland have in their little map of phases off the scrum. So he's a very good ruck player. You know, he's always high in the stats whenever we've done that. He's always got a good aggressive hit on him. As well as that, he has the jackling ability that you would associate with a traditional 7. A guy like Dan Levy, she showed it last weekend. 3 turnover penalties. I thought a couple of them were a bit questionable, but he's always in the mix for that. He's always looking for that turnover, and he's got great fight in him every time he gets on the ball. I actually enjoyed the way he kind of nonchalantly threw the ball away after a couple of his turnovers last weekend, but he showed a bit of a skill set that you would associate with a 7. I think that's what Joe Schmidt is really looking for from him. Go attack the ball, be really aggressive at the breakdown in attack, and also add in those little bits of passing and link play that he's added probably in the last 2 tests. I thought he was brilliant in both games, really. In the first test, he was quite a creative player, one little grubber kick and a couple of nice passes as well. So he is that link player, and his skill set really suggests he could do a pretty decent job there. I would also say, though, they do miss Dan Levy when he's not on the pitch. He's just so physically powerful, and that everything he does is magnified. You know, another player does it and they're not quite as powerful. Even a pick and jam, he'll make an extra 2 meters on it because he's so strong. When he hits someone, they stay hit. You know, he's got just big moments of physicality in him, and that's been missing a small bit at times. So it'll be good for Ireland when he comes back down the line. But that back row, I think generally the skill set will provide a bit of balance. And as we know, the ruck is a collective effort. All 15 of them are going to have to smash David Pocock and Hooper every single time.
Yeah, 100%. CJ Stander made the point all right yesterday, actually, about, you know, it wasn't just about Tyke Furlong and O'Mahony and people like that. It was some of the backs getting involved and getting Hooper and Pocock off the ball. Obviously, you mentioned as well Sean Cronin kind of getting a start. We'd spoken last week about how probably we hoped that would be the case. Like, you know, if it wasn't this Saturday, he was probably going to be always maybe resigned to being that impact. So he gets his chance now. Is the fact that, you know, we've had the 3 different hookers now involved in Rory Best's absence down there probably a sign that Joe Schmidt isn't 100% certain as to who the best backup is? I mean, everybody has gotten a shot. Who do you fancy to maybe emerge, say if Cronin goes well this weekend, as that sort of second option? And, you know, do you see Cronin as a potential starter down the line, or is this just a case of almost repaying the loyalty, given he has been there chipping away for so long?
Yeah, I felt for a while now that Niall Scannell is the guy who can really copper fasten that role in behind Best and eventually take over from him as the long-term first choice. I think Rob Herring has done really well in his 2 appearances. He's been one of the big winners on this tour. Cronin's just been a really interesting case. You know, a guy we expected to come in onto the starting team on this tour, and he's had to wait for his chance in the 3rd test. And while that's been happening, like Joe Schmidt has been talking quite publicly about the deficiency in his game at set piece. And even today, I asked Schmidt, what are you expecting from him? The first line was, I'm expecting him to make an impact in the set piece and be really solid in that department. So it's a clear challenge laid down to a player in quite a public manner, and I would expect a really vicious response from Cronin. I can only imagine he's highly motivated and realises, wow, I'm getting pushed to really show Schmidt what I can do with a lot of competition at hooker now. So I think he will respond in the right way. He's an excellent player. I think he's been good in Leinster's scrum, and his set piece stuff has been good there. So I'd expect a strong response from him. But yeah, for me, Niall Scannell is a guy who long term looks like the next hooker.
Very good. There's a question here from a William Knight. He says, while Marmion is the more experienced player and knows the setup, do you think having a more expansive player on the bench, such as Cooney, would offer more late in the game? What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, I was just chatting to this about someone earlier, about this earlier on. It's a very interesting position for Ireland because, Carbery's now got a game at 10. Ross Byrne is set for his debut, so there's an extra little bit of depth there in the out-half stocks. But Murray started all 3 tests. And John Cooney got 2 minutes off the bench in the second test. Marmion got 3 in the first test. So it's not like they're racking up big experience, albeit they are getting a taste of the match days and these big occasions. But I think if you're still in this situation where if you're going to go into a World Cup and Conor Murray's to get injured, then Ireland are looking pretty, weak in that area. I don't think the 3 players who are in the contention, Marmion, Cooney and McGrath, are bad players by any means. They've all been good for their provinces, but they haven't really had the exposure to prove themselves in big starts at this level. Certainly not Cooney and McGrath, obviously not at all. So it is a bit of a concern for me. In terms of the question about how it changes the game, I think Marmion is well capable of lifting the tempo. I think for him it's always about that consistency of pass. That's something we all take for granted with Conor Murray. His pass is so consistent on top of all the physical and kicking and tactical strengths as well, that when he goes off the pitch and it's another scrum half there, it's just a small few inches on the inside shoulder of a guy who's trying to run onto the ball, or to Johnny Sexton, who demands the cleanest ball as well. So that's the main thing, really. It is a little bit disappointing that Cooney doesn't get another chance, or a longer chance, certainly, to impress. But, he's definitely in the mix as well. And I think it'll just be really interesting to see where that pecking order goes now over the next year before the World Cup.
And, staying on the bench for a second, obviously we hope Ross Byrne does come on and make his debut and he's fully merits his position there. But given, and it's something Schmidt has mentioned as well, there are so few games remaining before the World Cup, so few tests. And we've seen Carbery get his sort of 65 minutes. He did a decent job, but I suppose when you consider that 5 Six Nations games, you're not necessarily going to tamper too much, and it's unlikely that Carbery will start, barring an injury to Sexton. Is it almost a... I wonder, I suppose, when the Ireland team returns from Australia, has Carbery got enough game time, given the opportunity, the window of opportunity that was there? I know, obviously in November you've got 4 games with Italy as well, and he'll probably start against the States and the likes, but this is probably one of the last opportunities to test him against really decent opposition. Do you think the Munster move and the fact that he will be probably starting 10 in the sort of cauldron of the Champions Cup has played into the decision there that to only give him the sort of hour-ish from the starting slot?
Yeah, well, I think getting 1 start from him is a pretty good return on this tour. The easy thing to do would just be start Johnny Sexton for all 3 games. We see how much of a difference it makes when he's on the pitch. Just last weekend, the first attacking set they got, he just takes immediate control. His body shape is constantly asking questions of a couple of defenders in the line. Even the try when Wallabies go down to 14 men, he gets Conor Murray in, he gets Conway in, he calls a play, having done his analysis and understood that the Wallabies aren't going to have a defender over in that left corner anymore. So he makes a huge difference. But I do think Carbery starting a test and leading the team for that full week will make a big difference for him, even going down to Munster. Just his mindset, his confidence, going down there to be that guy every single week, guiding the team and being the tactical leader. As you mentioned, in November, I'd be very surprised if he doesn't start 2 of those tests. I think in the Six Nations next year, I would imagine he'll start the Italy game as well, just to make sure he's keeping that experience, rising on that upward curve. So, yeah, I think they're doing a good job there. And I think there's a lot more to come from Joey Carbery, definitely. He's got massive potential, and I think this experience would have been good for him.
No doubt about it. We'll see how he goes over the next 12 or so months. There's a comment here from Free Dom on YouTube. He or she says, we need at least 60% possession to win the game. The Aussies scored 3 tries and they barely had the ball, which is slightly worrying. Referring there obviously to the second test. Do we need a little bit more of the ball? We obviously I would have thought we dominated possession last week anyway. What do you reckon?
I think the question is what you're doing with your possession. Ireland last weekend had 8 line breaks to the Wallabies 1, but they didn't have the return on those line breaks, and that's been a theme. We did a bit of analysis during the week there. Some of the opportunities Ireland have created, the Ty Furlong line break is a prime example. like that has to be turned into a try. It's great seeing your tight head prop go on a big rumble, throwing the ball up and it getting batted down. But you've got to be really clinical in those circumstances. And I know Joe Schmidt, he's mentioned it a few times, that he's frustrated with how his team have finished in behind the line. The Wallabies, on the other hand, are very clinical. One of their tries, in fairness, was a rolling maul as well, so it wasn't particularly attacking brilliance, albeit a very good forwards try. But that is a big challenge for Ireland. They always tend to dominate possession, but I felt in the second test last weekend, they looked a lot more creative, a lot more willing to take a little bit of a risk. There were a couple of nice offloads, passages where Ringrose goes to Omani, he offloads to Henshaw. We mentioned Ringrose's passing ability, obviously Johnny Sexton as well, and Ireland only kicked the ball 10 times, so it was a ball in hand performance that certainly offers encouragement, but it is about finishing off those chances. You get in behind, you got to be ruthless, and it's about picking your chance as well. One of the examples we analysed was Henshaw carrying hard, very close to the try line, and Pocock turns him over. You go back a phase before that, and there's a bit of a chance on the outside edge if Ireland are willing to pull one of those link passes in behind, which they're really good at doing further out the pitch. So it's about striking at the right time in those situations, and having really good, calm decision making, even in a position where a tight head prop is in behind the try line behind the defensive line going, I've never been here before, what do I do? So that's a big challenge for Ireland. And if they can start converting those, you're looking at a strong victory against a really good Wallabies team. Obviously, no team in the world is going to take every chance they create, but if you're going to challenge the All Blacks, well, then you got to be unbelievably good at turning those chances into tries.
Yeah, 100%. Actually, before we let you go back to the piddling Sydney Rain, we might as well talk about the Wallabies. Again, not much by way of change in their matchday squad, but a couple of introductions and potential introductions there.
Yeah, Luke Antui comes into the back row. Caleb Timu drops out. I thought he was very poor last weekend. A lot of errors, a couple of penalties. He really struggled, and they hauled him off at half time. He looked out of his depth, to be honest. So I think Tui will improve them. He was excellent against the All Blacks last year when the Wallabies won. Brings a lot of physical presence. He's a very dynamic carrier. So I think that will actually improve them. Timu hasn't really got up to the pace, despite being really good in Super Rugby. And then Nick Phipps obviously comes in at scrum half to replace the injured Will Genia. That's a real blow for the Wallabies. Will Genia is a very important leader, both tactically and in terms of his calm influence on the team. Phipps is a very good defender, covers really well in behind the defensive line, and his service does tend to be quite quick. He can be a little bit inconsistent with his passing and kicking skill, though. I think that'll be a bit of a dip compared to where Genia is. So I think that does weaken the Wallabies. And a couple of changes on the bench. Ned Hannigan, a good kind of line-out back row forward, and Joe Powell is as well in to cover scrum half. So mostly a pretty settled team. And I think for the Wallabies, it's just getting up to that physical pitch they were at in the first test. Like, I think a good example of it was Kurtley Beale, who was smashing guys in the first game, as well as being a brilliant playmaker. And in the second test, he just slipped off a few tackles. I don't know what was up. He looked slightly disinterested almost when he get into good positions to make a dominant hit. There was one on Ringrose where he just slipped off him, and he made a couple of bad reads on the outside edge. So if they can get back to that pitch and bring those big, massive hits again, it'll put them in a really good place. And as we've mentioned, their attack, it can be really lethal. So by no means is it going to be all Ireland's this final test.
No, we're looking forward to it. It's going to be a titanic tussle once again. Make a call on it, so Murray, before we let you go. What do you reckon? Are we going to get it done for the first time in 39 years, or will we be edged out as we were the first day?
Yeah, I think Ireland are going to get over the line. I think there's enough strength, and as you say, you mentioned earlier on the combinations being quite proven. Back three, centres, half backs, experienced front row, really good second row combination. And while there is a bit of uncertainty over that back row, all three players bring a lot of skill and a lot of physicality, as well as a bit of intelligence and handling skill. So I think there's more than enough there. My only slight concern would be someone like Johnny Sexton getting injured in the first couple of minutes, and then you've got a rookie out half. No slide on Ross Byrne. Obviously, he's not experienced at this level. He hasn't even been capped yet. So that is a slight concern. But Schmidt has wanted to get more than just wins out of this series. If he gets a win on top of the things he's trialled, it'll have been an unbelievably successful tour for Ireland.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Well, Murray, we'll let you get back to it, and we will chat to you after the decisive test on Saturday. Enjoy yourself in the meantime.
Cheers, catch you soon.
Nice one. And to you guys at home as well. That's all we've got time for. But we will be back after that third test on Saturday morning in Sydney. Well, I'll be back here. Murray will be back from Sydney. But until then, mind yourselves and enjoy the rest of the week. Cheers, Murray.
Cheers.